Looking back, we were like everyone else around the country. We didn't practice lockdown drills. We didn't have an active shooter protocol.
The culture goes far beyond simply having a uniform in the school. It really is the relationships the officer has, not just with staff, but with students as well.
You know, I am a teacher now, and sometimes it is hard for me to sort of advocate for safety, because sometimes I wonder if they're like, oh, it's because she's a Columbine survivor.
Columbine is the watershed moment when we start to talk about active shooters. Not just school shootings, but active shootings.
We didn't have the conversations about, well, what do you do and how we're going to train our kids.
We didn't have the right tactics in place. It took Columbine for us to change our mind, to change the way that we viewed the world.
Our kids are our most precious resource. That's who we're protecting.
You were 2 years old when Columbine happened.
Right, but I've heard the stories. I've lived very closely to the aftermath because it's something my dad experienced.
I'm A.J.DeAndrea. On April 20th, 1999, I was part of the Jefferson County Regional SWAT team that responded here to the high school.
Good evening, I'm John Ferrugia. Welcome to Insight. For the families of those 12 students and the teacher murdered at Columbine, the story never ends. They live with it daily. But while most of us don't recognize it, we're all benefiting from the horrible day 20 years ago because of those who have taken the lessons of Columbine and are tirelessly working to save lives. This is a story of how Columbine has changed the culture of our schools, of law enforcement, even our families, as we're now in an era of gun violence that seems ever present. We begin with a man who was there, who has responded to other school shootings. He accepts the failures of Columbine and is now driven to train others to be prepared for the worst.
We had a plan. We were prepared. It was just the wrong plan.
My name is Heather Martin, and I was a senior in 1999, the year of the shootings at Columbine. I was barricaded in the choir office. There were 60 of us in there for about 3 hours.
So we came in this way. We were told that there were 60 students in a closet off the music room.
Here we are all scrunched in one side of the office, and we're sitting like 3 deep. We're all sitting like cross-legged on top of each other because we want to keep away from the outer walls.
I had no idea who was in there.
We talked about the things that we wouldn't be able to do because we were going to die.
We didn't have a key at this point to get in. The only way we're getting in is breaking the glass, reaching your hand, and unlocking the door.
And if there's a shooter in there, you don't.
It's going to be bad. Yeah, this is going to be bad.
When they knocked on the door, we all looked at each other like, what do we do? And so one of them said, who is it? And they said, SWAT team, open the door. And so we were like, oh my God, we got to get out of here. So we're trying to move the desks and like pile out of there.
They're terrified. Right. These kids are terrified.
They yelled at us to get down. And from there, they searched us, they questioned us. Definitely really loud, really intense, and pretty scary.
So it was at that point where we heard from one of our snipers that there's a sign in the window of one bleeding to death. Was it real? Was it a ruse? Were we getting lured into an ambush? We didn't know any of that. What we did know for sure is we had 60 kids.
It was either like, okay, I'm gonna save these kids that are right in front of me, or I'm gonna go looking for this other person.
We were told that there were 6 gunmen inside this building barricading, unknown location, taking hostages, right? So that's a decision, right? Do you leave the 60 to try and find the one and not knowing if it's really one? I mean, we had no verification.
In fact, it was no ruse. They would find out later teacher Dave Sanders was mortally wounded and died before help arrived.
If you ask the family of the 60 if we did the right thing, they're gonna say yes. Mm-hmm. If you ask the Sanders family if we did the right thing, they're gonna say no.
Right.
And that's the dilemma of law enforcement. We have to make decisions based off, split-second things going on, and we do the best that we can.
That was one of hundreds of momentary life and death decisions made that day by officers who were simply unprepared.
School shootings had happened before this, but we thought these are just an anomaly, and it's not going to happen here. This was a failure in forward thinking, in planning, in preparing, in understanding, what the real dilemma was.
In 1999, when a gunman barricaded in a building with hostages, the standard law enforcement plan was to set up a perimeter around the building and call the SWAT team. And that is exactly what happened. No one went inside the building. The gunman had already shot students before entering the school, and they were shooting at officers who were set up outside.
They came under fire. The suspects had the advantage with the high ground. They engaged, they did their job. They did what they were trained to do.
But when the intent of the gunman is to simply kill as many as possible, and no law enforcement goes in immediately,
by the time SWAT gets there, it's way too late. It took Columbine for us to change our mind, to change the way that we viewed the world. We had to rebuild this thing from the ground up.
After Columbine, DeAndrea not only helped rebuild the Jefferson County SWAT team, but for the past 20 years, he has been involved in creating and training new tactics to deal with what is now called an active shooter. He has responded to other school shootings, and he has trained officers and agencies across the U.S. and in Europe.
After Columbine, right here kind of became the epicenter, is where the active shooter program started to roll out. And what that was training the patrolmen, giving them the skills, the equipment to be able to go into the building and address the threat. You talk to a young police officer right now that gets out of the academy, they know that's their job. They know they're going to go to work, they're going to go inside, right? And maybe even by themselves.
That single officer response evolved over time, from tactical training for 4, then 2, and finally for the first officer to respond. Because
the quicker that the officers can be inside, whether it be an SRO inside the school or an officer deploying from outside in, or a team of them, the faster they can engage, the suspect doesn't have time to continue to kill.
And he says Columbine had another immediate effect.
But it started to force communication between the school districts and law enforcement. And it started to force some of those conversations, and I think it forced us to develop better relationships with the school.
This is Carol at SWAT Canyon. We've got somebody with a gun.
September 26, 2006, get the call. It was almost the exact same call from dispatch that I got at Columbine.
Shots fired. They have students in the building.
Man with a gun, shot fired.
This guy is saying he has bombs in a bag.
A lone gunman with no connection to Platte Canyon High School in Bailey, Colorado, took several girls hostage in a classroom, sexually assaulting them, and then letting all go but 2, 16-year-old Emily Keys and a German foreign exchange student.
Law enforcement was much more prepared.
Shooting incident, Platte Canyon High, roll.
Because they understood the dilemma better, right? Because they had studied, they had learned, they'd been trained.
It's a stranger, room 206, upstairs in the English pod.
The gunman was isolated in one room and could not roam the building, finding more targets, as at Columbine.
And you've got a brave Park County deputy deploying by himself into that building. He knew the layout. He wasn't bogged down by trying to figure out where is this particular room. And that deputy, without hesitation, goes down that main hallway, breaks into that pod, and has that confrontation with the suspect right there at the entrance of room 206. And in my opinion, without a doubt, saved lives. And those are lessons learned from Columbine.
At Columbine, the classrooms were open to wide hallways.
There was nothing in there really to stop an intruder or the suspect's movements internally throughout this school.
But Platte Canyon, which was built after Columbine, is designed with hallways that lead to isolated pods of classrooms. That helped the responding deputy.
Pod systems. They were able to shut that thing down to restrict movement.
So it was Columbine that influenced the architecture?
Absolutely. And still does to this day.
Negotiations, they're done. They feel they can no longer get anywhere. You won't talk to them.
For 3 hours, the SWAT team and negotiators tried to reason with the gunman, who said little, instead using Emily Keys to respond. When it seemed clear he would not release them alive, DeAndrea and the SWAT team had to go in.
He's down. Took a girl with him. Get in medical.
The suspect shot one of the hostages and then shot himself. That's what it looks like at this time.
Emily Keys, who had helped other girls get out and continued to help negotiate with the gunman, was fatally wounded. The second hostage was saved.
And tell him that you spoke to me.
A.J.DeAndrea is currently the deputy chief of the Arvada Police Department. Emily Keys is never far from his thoughts.
At Platte Canyon, everyone says that was a tactical success. You've said to me, now that was a fit.
It was a failure.
Because you lost Emily Keys.
Because we lost Emily. There's no one that will ever be able to convince me that that was a success.
You know, Emily gave us a voice, and she also told us what to say. I love you guys.
Walking the halls of Platte Canyon High School today is always bittersweet for John Michael Keys. It is here he lost his daughter, and it is from here that emerged an idea and a plan that saves the lives of others. On that September day in 2006, when Emily Keys was taken hostage, she sent a simple text message to her family. "I love you guys." It was her last, but her parents did not blame law enforcement.
6 girls got out of that room. And I think it was a direct result of the efforts of that team. It could have been far worse.
And you believe that is because of Columbine?
Absolutely.
In their grief, Emily's family began to understand that the response by law enforcement is only one part of the equation to protect kids.
I realized that there wasn't a common language and common expectations of what to do in a crisis around the country with our schools. And we found a handful of districts in the country that were using some very specific language in their crisis response, and we packaged it and relabeled it and called it the Standard Response Protocol.
John Michael and Ellen Keys formed the I Love You Guys Foundation to train hundreds of teachers, administrators, organizations, and agencies every year, including school shooting survivors like teacher Heather Martin, to expand the reach and scope of the program.
We took lockout, lockdown, evacuate, and we added shelter. And those are the 4 actions of the Standard Response Protocol.
We found the Standard Response Protocol in 2009. It changed our lives. And
that was John Michael Keys.
That was John Michael Keys, and the I Love You Guys Foundation.
John McDonald, head security at Jefferson County School District. He and his team, working closely with local law enforcement, are focused on keeping kids safe in schools.
This building is now called the Frank DeAndrea Center for Community Safety.
He oversees the Frank DeAndrea Center, which was once an elementary school. It is named after the former Columbine principal, Frank DeAndrea.
This thing is ballistic protection.
Here, school districts and law enforcement agencies from across the country can train for the worst.
In the past year, we've had over 60 agencies, more than 6,000 police officers, sheriff's deputies, state and federal agents training in here, preparing for that given day.
And when I go in there, it's on.
A.J.DeAndrea is among those who use the facility to train officers.
These guys duck out and say, hey, we're out of the hallway, roger that, we're taking the hallway.
We gift the center to those agencies that want to come in here and train. We don't charge them for anything. This is our way of saying thank you for responding to our time of need.
But again, this is just one part of the school safety equation. Another component is how schools immediately respond before law enforcement arrives.
Get everybody inside, we're going to lock those outside doors.
That brought John Michael Keys, with program in hand, to Jefferson County.
Came to me, sat down in our office here, and I said, how much? He said, I'm not going to charge you anything. I just want you to try it. Call him back the next day. I said, I don't believe in testing it. We're going to implement it. We started training on the Standard Response Protocol in all of our schools, and it was battle tested that year.
Breaking news, there has been a shooting at a Jefferson County school.
In February of 2010, 3 weeks before our Deer Creek Middle School shooting, we first went into that school and trained and talked to the teachers and the administrators about what they'd see, what it'd feel like, what they needed to think about.
There he is. On that day, a mentally ill man shot and wounded 2 students outside Deer Creek Middle School. Because of lessons learned from Columbine, staff acted quickly, a teacher tackling the gunman before he could shoot others.
I love this program. I support this program and have for many years.
And that's why John McDonald is often right alongside Keys, helping train the Standard Response Protocol.
I believe it to be the fundamental program that we base all school safety on.
The I Love You Guys Foundation has mapped where school districts are now using the Standard Response Protocol, and the list continues to grow. Even so, John McDonald says there are no minimum standards for response training in Colorado or in most other states.
And that's a struggle. Frankly, that worries me a lot.
For Jefferson County and many other school districts around the state and around the country, Columbine also changed school access and school surveillance.
And you have to be on a video intercom to get into a school today. Video camera, robust surveillance systems that track people's movement, panic alarms inside schools that automatically connect with our emergency dispatch center here.
And while he wouldn't reveal the capabilities of the high-tech, high-definition surveillance system, he did demonstrate the lower-resolution optics.
We can zoom in and triangulate on vehicles, on people. You see them walking up to you when they're not supposed to be, and you can get out and engage them before they come into your environment.
But if there is a problem and police are called,
we can open up the door for our first responders.
From right here.
From right here. So they just pull and go.
And he says these are safety measures for all district schools. But for Columbine, there are even more unique security elements that can't be discussed.
For so many, it is a place of hope and inspiration. A lot of victims come here, but so too do a lot of people who are inspired by the killers. And that's been the biggest challenge for us.
How many people have tried to get into school?
We're averaging about 198 a month.
A month?
A month.
198 people a month are trying to get into school.
Yeah.
And what do you do? I mean, you have people there, obviously.
We stop them. We engage outside the building, not inside. I'm not giving them the opportunity to get in.
While he is doing everything to prevent it, John McDonald is obsessed with stopping a shooter who does get into a school.
32, I got one party down, no movement in room number 1. 32 shots fired.
I got vocal, gun! Suspect down on the ground.
This is a state-of-the-art, computer-controlled virtual reality shooter training at the DeAndrea Center. Officers can be run through hundreds of scenarios involving a gunman in one room or several rooms.
It really provides our professionals the ability to go into an environment and train just like they would have to respond using multiple rooms, noise.
The evolution of tactics, the standard response protocol, and attention to architecture are just a few of the sweeping changes since Columbine. But there are also many small individual efforts by those affected by Columbine that are making a difference.
So the Rebels Project essentially will connect survivors from mass traumas.
When Heather Martin realized the long-term effects of trauma in her life, she and others decided to reach out by creating the Rebels Project, named after the Columbine mascot.
Typically it's shootings, but not all school shootings. It's usually just what we might call like a mass casualty event. That's where we find all those similarities and those connections, so that people who have gone through these experiences don't feel so alone like I did for so long.
It was through her work with the project that she heard a SWAT officer give a presentation at Columbine High School. It was A.J.DeAndrea, whom she had not known nor ever seen since the day of the shooting.
I was one of the 60 kids in the choir office, and he was like, "Oh, were you?" And I was like, "Yeah." I would love if we could connect. I would love if we could just go get coffee or chat.
Earlier this year, they met after work, where DeAndrea noticed Heather assessing her surroundings.
Either I said, I feel safe, or AJ just said something like, "You know that you're like the safest woman in the world right now." And I'm like, I feel safe.
She shared insights with me, things that I didn't know. I think I was able to share some things with her, right, that maybe she didn't know or she didn't understand.
I really just wanted him to know that I was thankful that he did choose to save us in the moment with the information that he had. And that I was so sorry that he even had to make that decision.
To see such a young, vibrant woman having been through this and living her life to its fullest, that was good for me. Yeah, she's helping a lot of people. Yeah, she really is. She's making a difference. Right?
Yeah. And what their meeting demonstrated was that Heather's personal vigilance, dictated by her survival, is now AJ's mission, to make sure all of us understand the importance of having a plan.
What's the real target?
The individual.
The individual. So we need to train that across the board. And so we talk about evacuate, evade, defend.
Those actions are based on the guidelines released by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in 2013, actions born out of mass shooting experience and training.
Empowering people to understand the best thing to do if it's happening, get away. If you can't get away, evade to a point where you can barricade, or evade so that you just can't become a target. And moment in time, if your life is on the line, defend yourself or those that are next to you.
I want to get to decision.
And along with training law enforcement agencies in the 50 states, in most provinces of Canada, and some in Europe, this is the message he proclaims in presentations to anyone who will listen.
We're talking about everyday life. People want to be able to survive.
Yet with all of the training and information available since Columbine, there are still those who think it won't happen here and simply don't train. When the day came in Parkland, Florida, official reports say critical and fatal mistakes were made, like lack of training for police officers, staff, and students, no lockdown procedures, and leaving school doors unlocked to anyone wanting to enter the school.
Every red flag was there. All the lessons that we had learned across the country were disregarded. And that's a hard thing.
He says while he has trained officers in Florida, the deputies involved in Parkland never attended one of his tactical sessions. Yet, it is still personal.
To know that I've been in Florida multiple times, that I got interviewed on that commission, the governor's commission to investigate Parkland, right? And to have to talk about that, to see that failure is a failure for me as well, right? Because my profession failed.
My dad always says that the world's not a scary place, you just have to be prepared. And so I grew up really having an awareness of what was going on around me all the time.
A.J.DeAndrea is a graduate and a former student body president of the University of Colorado at Boulder. After college, she was working in Los Angeles.
Gun!
And being her father's daughter, she enjoys going to the shooting range with him.
One to the body, one to the head.
Running through his police drills.
Gun!
And she has many of the same sensibilities about the post-Columbine world.
In high school, I would make sure I would know how to get out of my classrooms if something happened, or where I would hide. I always knew where the exits were in a building.
In early November of last year, she went out with friends for a fun night at a small country and western bar in nearby Thousand Oaks, California.
I love swing dancing, I love line dancing, so it was really exciting to find the little gem in the midst of the big city.
We are following breaking news out of Southern California. At least 11 people shot inside of a nightclub in Ventura, California, the Borderline Bar and Grill.
Be advised, there are multiple shots being fired.
On my phone, I get a text.
For shooting at Borderline.
And as I look at it, it's my daughter.
Suspect's wearing a black hat.
And as I look at that text, it says, "I love you guys." Now that is the same text that Emily sent her father. And of course, my daughters know all that.
I was getting a drink of water and was kind of standing on the outside of the dance floor, and I heard popping noises.
They're like, what is going on here? And she's, "Dad, I'm in the bar. There's gunfire."
So I knew it wasn't fireworks, and I started to smell the powder. And immediately I heard my dad's voice in my head, "You've got to get out of there." The only door I knew about in the building was the door he came in, and so that wasn't safe. I knew I couldn't get out that way. So the next thing was to hide. And I was in that kitchen area, again, trying to put the wall in between the shooter and I. And a bartender pulled down a ladder from the ceiling. And so I immediately went up it after her. And a couple more people followed us up, and then we closed the trapdoor over the ladder. And then we were in the attic.
We got multiple people down. We need a lot of ambulance.
That night, it was the most hopeless I've ever felt in my life. Right.
As the shooting continued in the bar below her, Madalena knew people were dying.
And I was trying to text people, and I realized in that moment that I couldn't text because my fingers were shaking. And so I had to calm myself down. And from there, once I started getting my heart rate lower, I was able to make some more logical decisions. I need to try to find some way to, defend us if he comes up here.
I'm listening to the radio traffic. I'm texting her. I'm talking to them. I'm sharing the text that she's giving me to their dispatch. And of course, I'm booking a flight to Los Angeles on my iPad.
He got on the frequency for the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, and he was telling me what was happening on the radio.
Before the gunman killed himself, 12 other people died, including a responding police officer. A dozen others were wounded.
The gunshots had stopped by that point in time, and I didn't know what was happening. At Columbine, they lost the desire to kill, but they were still walking around. And so I didn't know if that guy was still down there.
We have information that there's subjects secreted in the attic.
He got me on the phone with Ventura County's dispatch.
There's a bartender and possible other subjects hiding inside the crawl space in the attic.
They called my cell phone, and I picked up and very quietly told them that there was about 6 people in the attic with me.
The main business is secure. Ask them if they'll shout out.
And finally, she's like, "Dad, I can see SWAT."
I think because of the exposure to what my dad's been through, and then also just his voice in my head throughout the entire process, there was that sense of safety there, even in the midst of very intense unsafety. And yeah, I think it saved my life.
Hours after the incident ended, Madalena was at home, waiting for her father, who had immediately boarded a plane to Los Angeles.
then he was at my door, and that's when I started crying. It wasn't until I was hugging him at my door. Yeah.
It came full circle. And my daughter's alive because she was empowered. She was empowered because we had the conversation. She did what she needed to do to survive. The message is you've got to talk about it.
Despite all the training he's done since 1999, A.J.DeAndrea has never really gotten over Columbine and being inside the school.
You're uncomfortable in Columbine.
Very much so.
I can see that. It's not an easy thing to sit in here.
No. There's times it seems like forever ago, and then there's moments where it's right now. It's a half of a heartbeat ago, right? That day changed everything. And I'm very uneasy in here. When I'm in here, when I'm in these four walls, all I'm left with is the failures. When I'm outside of this building, I can see all the good that came from it. That all the lives that have been lost in these senseless killings aren't in vain, because we've learned and we've made changes and we're taking responsibility for what our part is. And that's the message.